What's going on, folks? This is Matt here for Dark One Linux Tech and Gaming, where this is the fusion of Linux technology and gaming, and we're taking a look at a video that popped up on my YouTube recommendation feed, and it's Living Without Windows, about Linux. Curious title, not like a factual statement, which is always nice to see, because those videos with like those factually stated titles of like Linux is terrible with no explanations usually give me an ulcer. So let's see what the person in this video has to say about Linux and living without Windows.
Linux, someone loves, someone hates. In this video, I'm going to give you my 2 cents about Linux after using it exclusively for 4 years. So you can decide if you want to dip your toes into this river. Let's begin. As you know, I'm a Linux lover. I want to get the bad things out of the way first so that we can focus on the good. The first issue is loneliness. Using Linux feels lonely in real life. I'm grateful for all the open source developers contributing all the great solutions for us to stay away from the evil corporations. And I'm also grateful for all of you guys watching and subscribing. But in real life, I still haven't found a single companion to share my love for Linux on a daily basis. On top of that, I have to learn to shut up about it among my developer friends. From 2012, when I started my Linux journey until now, I have only seen 2 true Linux lovers in real life, but both of them have left my social circle by moving to other countries. Even though I have a girlfriend, the only open source tool I successfully forced onto her is Bitwarden. And even after that, she still writes some password on the iOS Note app because she lost faith in Joplin after losing all her nodes with a self-conducted migration without my supervision. I stopped convincing her to follow my passion ever since. My best friends, the first and second subscribers of my channel, might not watch every single one of my videos or even understand everything I have said here, but I don't blame them or dare to ask them to keep watching my video. This is just reality of Linux. It has a proper amount of users, but compared to the other in the market, it's still a niche. The second downside of
So I will say, as far as its niche, however you want to pronounce that, it's hard to tell. I know for me, as far as the networking effect, I know there was a conference where I live just recently around open source, and a lot of Linux users and all that stuff are there. So they're there. Unfortunately, I will say some of them take a lot of effort to find. And some people, I'm not going to lie, some people aren't just like, there are people that I do know that I have put on Linux that they're just not passionate about technology in general. It doesn't matter if it's Linux, Windows, Mac OS, whatever. The tools that they use are just the tools that they use. So what I found is, if you're going to talk about like Linux style stuff, like open source and, GNU, and if you want to go like the free software foundation definition of things, the best way is to relate to the tools that people use. So, whatever IDE you're doing development on, etc. That helps them understand where you're coming from, and, where something might be a strength in Linux might be a weakness in one, or vice versa. So it strikes up conversation, and that's really kind of what matters. But yeah, it can, if you don't like to live online, and I love tech, I love video games, all that stuff. But, staring at a screen for 16 hours a day is not my ideal life. Let's just put it that way. So for me, I go outside kind of deal. It's just one of those things where, yeah, it's nice to have people that have similar interests that you can physically interact with and talk to and stuff. So I totally get that.
using Linux is the gear support. I bet the majority of Linux users share a common love for electronics. Ever since I started the journey of YouTube, I've been having trouble updating my camera and lens. My company blocks all the USB functions on those Mac machines they forced me to use, and the camera companies couldn't be bothered to provide a way to update their gears using Linux, which means I need to study thoroughly or be ready to compromise before buying each piece of my new gear. And most of the time, I compromise. The perfect example here is that after starting editing on the M1 chip, I just can't go back to x86 now. And if I want to get a personal...
So I'm not gonna. He was talking about M2 Max and all that stuff. So I'm gonna go back to what you were talking about prior. Two different approaches here. Select the gear that'll work with it. You are correct. If you are building a machine or a Linux workstation or whatever, research. It's no different than if you were building a Windows machine and you want, making sure you get all the right parts and all the other stuff, because you, believe it or not, when people build a desktop, they can fuck up building a desktop. Oh, I got an AMD board and I have an Intel chip. It happens more frequently than people like to admit. Oh, my PSU is not powerful enough for the graphics card. Wrong timing RAM. Take your pick. So the amount of research applied to a machine that you're going to buy should also be applied to the perpetuals and all the other things that you're looking to buy for it as well, because you all also always have to make sure that those perpetuals will also work with things like Mac OS and all the other stuff if you're the creator type. That's just a reality. I get kind of annoyed when I hear this, and it's not his argument, like just in general is, well, why should I have to research it? It just works on Windows. Well, then if that's what you want, then go fucking use Windows. If this, a lot of tech in general, what I found is compromise. Is it price compromise? Is it this compromise? It's compromise all the time, unless you have a ton of disposable cash. In general, tech and value for money and all the other stuff is very compromised focused, unfortunately. So that's just kind of the reality. The other recommendation, if you're not looking to go that route so much as the research, go buy from a Linux OEM. And I know certain people in the community, the rip off, blah blah blah. Frankly, shut up. There's so many arguments on why they're wrong. It's not even funny. But realistically, I would, go. I don't think Za Reason's around anymore. But a System 76, a Juno, insert company here, Slimbook. I can't name all of them off the top of my head. Star Labs, there's a few other ones. Tuxedo is the other one. So it all depends on the experience you're looking for. So as far as the M2 stuff, I'm not going to really comment too much on this because while I've used Macs, I've had Macs, etc. They're all Intel based. Apple's ecosystem just isn't for me, so I can't really comment on this and the performance and all the other stuff he's probably going to be talking about here. So this portion might be just me kind of shutting my mouth, which some people might actually fucking like.
Mac workstation and use Linux on it, I'll probably have to get an M1 chip for better usability than M2, according to Asahi Linux page.
So I will say, in fairness to the Asahi Linux folks, at least they're honest about it and where it's currently sitting.
The final obstacle is debugging and solving issues. After trying to make my father and my girlfriend use Linux, I realized the issue most people face with Linux are not customization or drivers, because modern desktop environments are already following the similar design pattern to be user-friendly, and Linux has become miles ahead on supporting hardware. The most common issue I got from them are how to change brightness, resolution, and whether they can close the laptop lid while using an external monitor.
Okay, so brightness, display, resolution, and all that stuff. Some of it's going to be muscle memory from other OSs about where stuff is located, how it's named, naming conventions, etc. You give a lifetime Windows user a Mac, they're not going to understand how to use Finder. They're not going to understand where how, like DMG installations. They're not like there. It's just a different mind field of a brain fuck coming from any OS. So, uh, depending on distro, depending on desktop environment, these are kind of the cores of things. And that really is more making, if you're going to put people on Linux, tailor the distro kind of to what they're coming from, that they might be more familiar with. Again, things are going to be different. And I think highly, highly, highly mentioning that this is not going to be like the same thing you were using. This is going to be different is really important to drive home. And I don't think we drive it home enough. And it's like, oh, it's a drop-in replacement for Windows after a learning curve. But that's learning curve is really no different than anything else. So I agree. And debugging and all that stuff with like resolution and all that jazz, like simple things are going to be different, which require people to understand that it's different. But like a technology-based question like, oh, can I shut the lid while it's, on an external monitor? Well, depends on the default state of said, laptop or whatever. And that goes to, the default state of a Windows machine, a Linux machine, or a Mac machine. So it's all relative there. But again, I will agree. Certain things are more about learning curve and getting out of the comfort zone and getting out of the familiarity bubble that a lot of people like to live in, unfortunately.
And when it comes to Googling stuff, because they don't know the modularity nature of the Linux distributions, they will expect to solve a setting issue in minutes only to find that all the results are more or less related to Ubuntu, or the solution requires them to type in something in terminal which is either too scary or non-functional.
So most of the, again, I'm just using the examples you used and I'm not trashing on them or anything. Most of those can be solved simply from the GUI. I will say I get rather annoyed when people, I want to change my resolution or, something that is relatively easy that could be done from a GUI perspective is then defaulted in the man pages or the help pages or whatever you want to call it to the fucking CLI, to the terminal. It is mad obnoxious. Why is it everyone thinks Linux is hard to use? Your perception is reality. The perception is it's hard to use because you look at all your fucking help pages. That's what it boils down to. People just don't like hearing that. So, again, I'm not trashing on what he's talking about or the reasons he's giving. I'm just saying that a lot of it is some community self-inflicted stuff and some of it is just like a demographic, people not understanding that change is change and things are, while similar, also going to be fucking different.
Alright, now these are the pain points I can think of for people who use Linux. If none of them have scared you yet, let's talk about the strengths of Linux. The very first one is stability. After quitting Windows for 4 years, I've never run into an issue with gaming after it's properly set up or blue screen. If you have watched this video or this video, after setting up the pure Fedora for gaming on this external SSD 6 months ago and Sunshine Moonlight combo recently with my Nvidia Shield TV Pro as the client, I haven't seen a system crash once. My girlfriend and I have played It Takes Two on TV for a long enough time that we already beat the Space Monkey now. Apart from a few hiccups during the cutscene which might be the result of the USB 3.0 speed, or the encoding power of the mobile version GTX 1660 Ti on my laptop. Nothing else had interrupted our bonding sessions. Next is the performance. I was surprised that the average FPS.
So gaming on Linux, then I'll note he says properly set up. That this is where people don't understand like what certain like specific distros, niche distros, designed by distros really matter. My distro of choice is Garuda, specifically because of the way it packages Proton and puts all that stuff, so I don't have to go and do external installs of Proton GE and all the other stuff with something like Proton Up Qt or whatever. It's just done as an insert into the distro itself. That stuff really matters. Excuse me. That stuff really matters. So sometimes, I will be the first to admit, sometimes like getting an Ubuntu or a distro that doesn't, it's more general use purpose, but requires the user to tinker and install stuff more to get things to work, is not always the best recommendation. So the reason I harp a lot on the niche distros, and they do matter, the boutique distros, is because they do matter, because they cater to a very specific use case, and those use cases are the things that matter. I detest the insert one all approach that macOS and Windows try to take. It is fucking god awful. One size fits all is so annoying. It is the worst, because you get nothing good and all the bad, and that's it. And if people don't understand what I mean by the one size fits all approach, is go look at Windows 8. How much did y'all love that UI change? One size fits all. Tough shit. Go eat a sack of shit, because that's what Microsoft gave you. Now the community fixed some of that, I will say that, but it's that kind of approach that makes it kind of a garbage experience. So I tend to view Linux options as more of appliance options. So what's your primary use kind of deal? The ancillary stuff is great, but like your primary use, content creation. Okay, here's a content creator distro that happens to do a bunch of other stuff. So I might go make a recommendation for, at one point, Salient OS. It needs to be updated. So there's just stuff like that where it's like, yeah, kind of know your audience and that kind of stuff, and understand like this stuff really does matter. The out of the box experience matters, because it gives the people that are going to be using it the best experience possible with the least amount of fuss. We might like the fuss and the hurt and the pain and the learning experience that goes with it, but not everybody does.
FPS differs so little after running the benchmark in Red Dead Redemption 2 in my last video when comparing the pure Fedora to the stripped down performing Windows. Bear in mind that the whole Linux system was running on an external SSD while the Windows was on native NVMe. I have more videos coming in benchmarking games, so stay tuned if you're interested. Now let's talk about the two common free stuff that always come with open source concepts: price and freedom. 6 years ago, after building my gaming desktop, I paid $100 for a legal version of Windows Home, and 2 years after that, I decided to sell my stack and keep the Windows copy. But somehow it was extremely sticky to the motherboard. I follow many suggestions online, officials or not, but whenever I rebooted the machine, Windows said it was activated. Then I called their customer services. After spending 5 hours hopping through several Microsoft representatives, they told me to dispute the charge with my credit card company in the end. Yes, you heard it right. That was the final solution Microsoft can officially suggest to me. And that is when I decided to make my switch to Linux. Since then, I haven't spent a penny on the operating system and couldn't be happier.
So I'm gonna have a more of a controversial take. Um, I am all for the base OS being free. I'm fine with that. I'm also fine with people charging for an OS, as long as the base OS doesn't get in my goddamn way and doesn't tell me that I can't change shit, delete shit, or break the system if I so decide to. That is my choice. So as an example, Microsoft, Apple, and all these other companies, and even Google, to an extent, unless you can get root, will tell you no to changing certain defaults, certain apps, certain things. On the Android end of things, the bloatware issue, Samsung and its fucking duplication efforts of apps that already fucking exist, etc. On the same device, mind you. All that stuff. They're like, nope, you can't change it. You can disable it, hide it, but it's still there. That's balls. That's the OS getting in my fucking way. If I don't want Firefox by default, don't tell me I have to leave Firefox installed and then go download Vivaldi, and then I have two browsers. I don't want fucking Firefox. Firefox was the portal to get me to Vivaldi, as an example. Just on Windows, insert that with Edge, or on Mac, insert that with fucking Safari. So it's the same logic. That's the difference. And I'm okay with that charge. So if a company ends up selling a Linux distro in a box at, fucking Walmart or whatever, I'm fine with that. Because the core still allows me, the user, the freedom to do what the user decides to fucking do with the system. That's the key to me. When certain things decide to start getting in my way, that's when I start taking issue with distros and approaches to software in general. So I agree. But I have no problem with spending money. I do think we need to I never spent any money as kind of away from that, because we need to support these projects. So my recommendation, like example, I support Garuda every month with a monthly, donation, or whatever you want to call it, a monthly surcharge, a monthly fee, whatever, whatever good term you want to use here. I do that every month because it works on all my systems. I don't have to fight the system, and it ships with a defaults that, for the most part, I'm okay with. That to me is worth the 30, 40, 50 bucks a year I might pay. But you don't have to if you don't want to, or if you can't afford to. But if you have the means to, do it, because the financial aspect does fucking matter. People might not think it matters, but it fucking does. So I appreciate it's free, it doesn't cost me money approach, but I also understand that we kind of need to get away from that just being the core selling point too.
The second free stuff is freedom. This is the core of free software. With Linux, I can do whatever I want to the system because the user has the freedom to do so. I can keep my gaming data along with the whole system on an external hard drive. I can customize the desktop to look however I want. I can completely change the desktop to another without reinstalling the whole system if I get bored. I can even try to make a profit on YouTube by talking about them. And this is only a tip of an iceberg. In Linux, you can change almost anything if you feel like to do so, and the rabbit hole goes as deep as you dare. Finally,
So I already kind of talked about the system getting in the way. So those freedoms that he's talking about are exactly the things that, as long as that is there at the base level, I don't care if people decide to charge money for it. If you give me a good product based on it, I'll probably buy it. If you make a bad product on it, I probably won't buy it. I'll probably go download the free version and try that instead. But realistically, that core underline right there is what matters most to me. And sometimes we get too hung up on oh, it's free, it didn't cost me any money. Yeah, at some point somebody's going to want to get paid. Doesn't matter. It's not a waste of time, etc. But some people want to get paid for their passions. We tell the community in, the open source community, the free software community, whatever you want to call it, that, oh, scratch your own itch. Well, some people want to get paid for scratching that itch. That's really what it boils down to. Follow your passions. And if your passion is programming and all that stuff, and you want to get paid for following your passions, I have no problem with you doing that, as long as the shit you make doesn't get in my goddamn way and doesn't restrict what I can and can't do with it. So if I decide to change it, cool, whatever. That's my prerogative. If you limit me to not being able to do that, yeah, no. So everything he's already talked about with the freedom stuff, that's really the core that matters to me. And this is where it's like, so that core, that licensing is really what matters when it comes to getting in the way of the user using a system from a software perspective or a piece of software. That's what matters to me. So I'm ironically weird when it comes to licensing, because I'll say that the BSD is actually a better free software license than the GPL. Just in that you can do what you want with it. There's no give back clause and all that stuff. I like the give back clause, but on the same note, not everybody does. So I'm very much in the BSD camp when it comes to licenses. Do what you want with the code. What is it? Do whatever the fuck you will with code. License. That's kind of where I'm at with it when it comes to licensing.
Let's talk about the ease of use. I know it might be a little controversial to put it here, but the point I'm trying to make is that as long as you have the proper hardware, you don't have to configure anything. All the drivers are shipped with the kernel. If you don't have an NVIDIA GPU, you are done as soon as the system finishes the installation with the initial update. And speaking of the NVIDIA driver, it is so easy to install nowadays that my very first video of this channel as a YouTube newbie was to test how long does it take to install the proprietary driver on different major distributions. Not to mention things like Ventoy and FlatHub. It seems
so you're right. And a lot of ISOs now ship with like some version or some area of like the NVIDIA out of the box driver. So the install is even easier now, which is fan-fucking-tastic.
Seems that Linux is getting easier to use by the days, with so many smart people getting involved in the development process. That's all for this video. Thank you again to all the open source developers out there, and you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.
So I have no issue with a lot of his takes. Difference of opinion maybe on how he views certain things, but that's totally awesome. I can appreciate what he's talking about. I do love the realistic nature that he took with the video, that it's not one of these just kind of, oh, because it's free. It's like, no, there's pros and cons and all the other stuff. So I do like that approach. Whether or not they're cons, and that's a debatable point of view. But still, overall, good video. I'm definitely going to be doing this one thing right now, and that is subscribe. And I think he has definitely earned that. Definitely a straight shooter on his content, and I can appreciate that. And a realist when it comes to like pros, cons, Linux, not the option for everybody, etc. I think that's a valid criticism and a valid take. So other than that, folks, I will catch you on the next one. And remember, this is a fusion of Linux technology and gaming. Peace.